police have their suspect.
We begin with a breakthrough development in the search for the person who shot students at Brown University, as well as a top MIT professor.
Previously, he attended the same academic program as the MIT professor Nuno Loureiro in Portugal between 1995 and 2000.
Night, investigators identified him as 48-year-old Claudio Manuel Nueves Valente, a former Brown PhD student.
The question now, what was the motive?
Immediately following Professor Loureiro's murder, Nueves Valente drove to a storage facility in Salem, New Hampshire, where he had rented a storage unit.
Video right here coming in from WBZ out of Salem, New Hampshire. That is where last night law enforcement heavily surrounded a storage unit where they say inside they discovered the body of their suspect.
On this After Action report, we'll look at how police handled the investigation. Did they make the right calls?
We also have a clearer picture on the suspect's movements. The attack happened Saturday in Providence, Rhode Island. Then 2 days later, the gunman killed an MIT professor in Brookline, Massachusetts.
Were there missteps? What about the media and the questions they were asking? This story isn't over.
My name is Ronald Serpas. I've led many major investigations while a police officer over 34 years of service.
I'm Jeff Pegues. I'm a reporter who's covered thousands of investigations. As we start this After Action report, what do you think about the investigation? A lot of pressure on the investigators. I thought this was going to be another pipe bomb investigation where somebody's face is covered up, their limbs are covered up. It's hard to identify who this is. So initially it must have been frustrating for police and the FBI, and the pressure was growing. So what do you think as we start this After Action report about what happened in Rhode Island?
So you think about the arc of history. 25 years ago, a police chief, a mayor, a governor could give a press conference like that and have a very clear message and stay on message. And you want to present an image of control, calm, taking the steps necessary to ensure safety. And you fast forward through my career as a chief, it all started to change. And the change of social media, the change of, in your early days as a reporter, if you had one or two sources, you didn't have to worry that they would get off the phone with you and call the next source who wanted to beat you with a clickbait. So it changed the whole dynamic. And I think we saw a little bit out here in Brown. So what happened is a horrible tragedy occurs, and nothing generally happens overnight. It usually takes some time. The second thing is when a police chief is communicating during a crisis like this, they really need someone like you, for example, who really understands how to frame the message, how to ensure you don't get off point, because that starts to become a confusion for the public that's just hoping to find out the most information. And really, one of the things that police chiefs and mayors and all now have to confront more than anything, before we get into the actual case that we know of, if I tell you on Monday that I think we're looking for a red car, and then on Wednesday I say, no, I think it's a red car that's half brown, it's portrayed by people as if you're misleading the public. Facts change at the blink of an eye. And in this case, you could see that the press conferences have been criticized for being disjointed. The press conferences have been criticized for not really being able to explain why or why not Brown University would or wouldn't release pictures. You saw how it got all distracted away from the work, because those are important questions, by the way. Everybody has a right to ask those questions. But to your point that we started with, when that one little piece of information that pops into the ecosystem, and that's why Crime Stoppers is so important, because you think your description of a blue car doesn't matter. However, that might have been the last piece needed. So in this case, I think there's been plenty of reporting that a similar circumstance occurred. They were gathering a lot of information. They were moving in a lot of coordinated effort between local, state, and federal. And then that one piece of information pops, and it shows you real world timing how quick, well coordinated, well trained, experienced detectives can move and move with haste and dispatch. That's not the same thing. That's not the same job the chief has. That's not the same job that the mayor has or the governor has. Their job is completely different, as I explained. It's how do you communicate that this issue is being handled with the most important assets, the most directed activities in a world where everybody is really expecting instant information. And that's a quagmire you can't get out of. And when we work with police leaders, they have to really think carefully about how to have that public facing piece, because behind the scenes, those detectives are busting their humps. They're out there following leads. They're out there doing all that they can possibly do. But I think that's the point, is how you message it as the elected or appointed leadership is how people begin to characterize what they think is going on. Fair enough.
Mhm. Do you think the leadership in this case was effective communicating the message, or did they fail somewhere along the line?
Well, I think it's that's a great question, because there's been a lot of feedback in social media that those press conferences could have gone a lot better. I don't know how fair that is or how unfair that is, because when people are looking for information and you don't have an answer, you need to have a really clear answer why you don't. Because if not, the void will get filled in. So I think in some instances, in this case and other cases, elected and appointed leaders are able to narrow in on a message, deliver that message strongly. Know you're going to be asked questions to move you away from the message, but for the purpose of the public, it needs to be as clear and concise as possible so they can start reconciling it. The public is very aware of the differences of opinions of people, right? They understand that. I think looking back on it, probably the piece that stuck out in my mind, and I'm just one of millions of people who watch this news, the inability to clear the air on what was going on with the decision makings of Brown University. I think that fueled the fire of questions. Like, well, wait a minute. Do they have 800 cameras? Do they have 1,200 cameras? Does nobody really understand what happened that we could talk about? There probably is good reasons, but you wouldn't know that from those press conferences. And that's what I think causes the public to get confused and concerned. And this is a time when you want people to be certain and sure.
Mhm. Well, so what are you saying? Are you saying that Brown University should have had a better handle on how many cameras they have, where they are? Is that what you're saying?
Well, in a way, yes, because if you can't answer those questions with clarity and certainty, the void will be filled with innuendo and rumor. And that really can hurt the momentum of an investigation, in the sense that the people will start to lose confidence. You know, those are simple questions. How many cameras do you have? Well, this is how many we have. Do you have any around this building? Yes, we do. We have bing, 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 bing. And you notice already it starts moving away from, well, why didn't you say that? And then if there's always, not if, there's always a place where the prosecutors or the police can say, now, ladies and gentlemen, we've answered every reasonable question we can given the circumstances of the case. It didn't appear reasonable that you couldn't say how many cameras you had, or it didn't appear reasonable that you couldn't say why some of those images weren't being used. It didn't appear reasonable that some reporters were saying in the area around the university, there are ring cameras all over the place, and that's where we're getting the bulk of the information, which is fair. But when was the last time you stepped onto a public university? I mean, then when was the last time you stepped on a university? There's cameras all over the place. I only raise this for this meaning. It just let too many things hang in the air. They could have been dispatched with very quickly with a very carefully thought through answer. Brown's a private university. They might have some legal concern. All you got to do is say, look, on advice of our advisors, we've decided not to discuss what our cameras may or may not have in furtherance of this investigation, not to I think that would have probably done a lot more to end it. But that was the one thing that kind of stuck in my mind, is that it didn't see it. And then secondly, and Jeff, I know you know this, when you're in the middle of this kind of circumstance, you need an incredibly well-trained professional who understands journalism, who understands messaging, who understands the questions, and who also understands how to say, okay, we've done enough right now. There's nothing else we can give you right now. Because when those press conferences go that long, then it's just going to cause more speculation and more speculative questions, which are fine. But if you get into that speculative question all day long, that's the headline for the next hour. Remember, in our day, it used to be the next headline for the next day. But now that's the headline for the next hour. And that's a distraction to the police department. And that's a distraction to the community. So bottom line, you need incredibly well-trained people to help you create a message, stay on the message, and say, ladies and gentlemen, we're done for today, or we're done for right now. We will be back in a little while. It's hard, right? Because the journalists have every reason to ask questions and the right to ask questions. But your ultimate purpose here is not to confuse the public and certainly not do anything to damage an investigation, which I'm not saying happened here, but that's the other thing in your mind.
Well, and listen, timing was important because now we've learned that he was able to get up to Brookline, Massachusetts and kill that MIT professor, according to investigators. So if I'm in the media, or at least traditional media, I would be asking, okay, what was the timeline? How much time did it take him? Did it take days to get up from Brown to Brookline? I mean, how much time was there in between these shootings? And were police investigators moving fast enough? Could a life have been saved? Right? So if I'm still working for CBS News, which I'm not, those are the questions I would want to know, right? The timeline, because then it opens up investigators to criticism. Not like I want to criticize them, but a natural question is, could that MIT professor's life have been saved?
And the reason you have to know that those are the kind of questions you're going to get is so that you can have answers that are rational and candidly believable, right? I mean, much of this they may not have known, but in the context of our thinking about how things could happen at different times, you need to expect those kinds of questions because an hour seems like a very long time to people. And most importantly, our bodies and our brains, when we're stressed, the first thing you lose is time and space orientation. So even for police officers, like this is not meant to be melodramatic, but everybody who's listening to us has probably been in a life or death situation. And the first thing you notice is everything slowed down. And you started not being able to hear a lot of things around you because your body is telling you there's a threat right here, and this is what we need to focus on. So what happens is that people think an hour is such a long time, but in the middle of a crisis, an hour could feel like 10 seconds. So being able to understand how to explain, that wasn't as good as I wanted, but I was trying to get to a point. So maybe there was nothing that could have happened in that 60 minutes. But being able to say, and the reason we know that is because A, B, C, D would be helpful. And remember, Jeff, all this is in the court of public evaluation. This isn't what's going to be in civil litigation or criminal litigation where the calm minds have long times to consider. Again, my point, back to Chiefs, you got to be ready for all these kinds of questions because they're fair, and you could certainly expect they're going to happen. But to your original point, when the police do get the things that can make them go in the directions they need to go, they go and do really, really, really good work. The third thing, and this is no criticism of anybody, but those are communities that probably don't have a tremendous amount of events that causes this kind of consternation in a community. Meaning, those are muscles you haven't practiced, right? When was the last time anything like this happened? Horrible as it is, but if you go to the other cities in the country where these kind of things happen a bit more frequently, sad as they are, you're actually exercising that muscle every time. The communication strategy, the accounting for time and being able to say clearly, this is what we think happened. We can't say this today, because you've kind of exercised that muscle. And it's not the same as being a mayor or governor, or it's not the same as being a fire chief. These are the kind of things that people have been reading about Sherlock Holmes and mysteries for centuries. They have an intuitiveness they think that understands crime. That's the key. It's being able to communicate and communicate effectively.
Yeah.
Which I just spent 100 words not doing very well. It's being able to communicate effectively in a crisis.
No,
Leadership. That's
I get what you're saying. And this is why I like doing this with you, because you offer the law enforcement perspective. How many investigations have you led? I'm not going to put you in the position where I say, how many investigations similar to this one have you led? You've led some big ones, I'm sure, but this is unique. This kind of thing where the whole world is watching, it doesn't happen to everyone. Has it happened in your career where you've led
absolutely.
an investigation like this?
Unfortunately, sadly, way too many times. You think about the McNair case in Nashville, which got worldwide attention from the moment that case was known to the public, every day, all day. Don Aaron is our public affairs commander, professional, been in business his whole life. He is the best in the United States of America from our point of view and my point of view. And that case was another one where messaging was so crucial because there was a gap in time from when Mr. McNair was found and the ability to fill in some blanks. And believe it or not, a young reporter in the biggest television station actually created a crime scene to fill in blanks from their point of view from rumors that they had heard.
Oh my!
Not a single point was right. Nothing in that was right. Absolutely everything was wrong.
Yeah, but see, in their view, they're just thinking, "Oh, that's going to make great TV." Right.
Exactly right.
I mean, that's and again, I'm providing the reporter perspective, you're providing the law enforcement perspective, and that's why I think this is good. Because you're right, that reporter, whoever it was, they just want to be walking around a crime scene. This happened here. To them, that's good TV. It's ridiculous, but that's the way they think.
Well, and to your point, that's why a chief, as annoyed as I was by it, because it was causing some consternation in the community that was totally unnecessary. It wasn't their fault that we were this close to being able to say what we needed to say, but they wanted us to be that close. And you're right, I understood why they did what they did. And subsequently, when we talked to the station manager about it, said, look, I get it, I understand it, but the misrepresentation that was done in the advancement of journalism or good TV really caused a lot of damage with people who were watching and hoping that you knew the answer. So when we did the final press conference, and must have been 200 members of the media there from all over the world, we were able to put to rest all that. And that helped a lot. We had the Mother's Day shooting here in New Orleans where 21 people were shot. We've had multiple horrible shootings on Bourbon Street in the middle of huge crowds. In Nashville, we had major events. In Washington State, we had major events. And I only could remember the important lessons. Every time I was the chief, our public affairs commander was a trained professional journalist. And they did more to help than I think most people would have expected. So when you're the chief, you're going to get a lot of input from the chief of detectives. And then you got to balance that against something, because oftentimes detectives would prefer if you didn't say anything. And they have reasons for that. And those reasons are often quite legitimate. But when you put the other hat on that the public is hurting in some cases, McNair was a tremendous character in the community that people just loved him. Or the Mother's Day shooting where you had 21 people just mowed down and guns and all these other things that we've experienced. You have to also remember and say to the detectives, look, there's a bigger issue here too. And that's not only the great work you're doing, but the community is confused. The community is scared. The community is jumping to conclusions that don't help your investigation. And then the chief has got to manage up. Then the chief has to figure out how to get the mayor and their team on board. Because remember, once you move to that next level as a mayor or a governor, they've got people telling them, oh no, you got to get out in front. You got to show leadership. You got to get out and say something. And that managing up process is as difficult as managing media relations, because mayors and governors are incredibly smart people, no matter who they are. It's kind of ridiculous. You don't get to be there without having something in your favor. And they have it. But they also have advisors whose only mission is to make them look like they're powerful, in charge, leadership, and making all the decisions. And that's just not how it works. So you have to balance that, right? When you saw the press conferences with the mayor, the Providence police chief, the governor, the attorney general, once you start having all those characters in a play, they all have different roles and they all have different scripts. Getting that all squared away beforehand, and I'm not saying they did or they didn't, but I would think that would be the most important thing. Before you go out, what is it, our global message? How do we contribute to each other's message? And then let's get off the stage.
So, to the final question. This, of course, the intensity of the coverage on Brown University and that shooting, it's going to die down. And what I mean by that is the networks, the national media, the world media is going to start turning away probably by the end of today. But you're going to have some aggressive local reporters who are staying on the story. Most importantly, in my view, you're going to have the New York Times, the Washington Post, and their investigative teams digging into what the investigators did, looking for any sort of little point of potential criticism. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's going to happen. And then once they break something, they're going to break something. And it might be about the timeline that we discussed earlier. Then you're going to have ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC back on the story. Right?
Yeah.
As you enter the second phase of this response to this shooting, right? The criticism, cops under the microscope. Okay, that's phase 2. Right or wrong. But perhaps it's the kind of after action investigation that can help, future investigations if there was anything worthy of criticism. So how do you expect the investigators to go forward? They still have a lot of questions to answer, right? Including, when did they actually get that Reddit tip? Could it have come in a few hours after the shooting and then nobody saw it because it was Reddit? Right? It wasn't like a call to the hotline. It was Reddit, which somebody might have overlooked that, right? They might not have seen it 6 days ago. It might have been there the whole time.
Well, there's two really important lessons here. After actions, right? After every major press conference, or even any press conference I did, the first question I asked the public affairs commander is, what could I have done better? And that's a continual learning experience, because communicating is so crucially important from the top. Investigative after actions are always positive in the sense that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn from those mistakes, you're going to know about it. However, times are changing. When you get a major case like that, there could be in the order of thousands of tips. So that vetting process, that triaging process, if it's well explained to the media and the public, they will understand it. And they can say, wait a minute, we had 12,000 tips came in 20, whatever the number. However, What I think can help us is the power of greater analytics of AI and computers now that can go out and scrub the internet in ways that we've never done before. I mean, Grok's only been around a while. ChatGPT's only been around a little while. Perplexity's only been around a little while. Imagine as we learn more about how those software packages just scrape the internet, and that can help you in ways we've never had before. But the crystal point here is, what was the triaging system? And even reporters I've had problems with who were biased, just like I might be biased. If you have a very clear, laid out, articulated plan of how you did it, everybody's going to understand, particularly in a horrible case like this, where I'm sure they had thousands of tips from any source, right? You're going to have something to say. If you had a very strategic outlook, if you had a very calculated plan of measuring the changes in the tone, and you got to be able to explain that. If you can't explain that, then I think you're going to have a real serious problem. My suspicion is because the FBI was engaged and they have a lot of deep resources. State police usually have deeper resources than local agencies. One of the misnomers in American policing is that state policing is a bunch of troopers writing tickets on the interstate. That's absolutely not correct. State police agencies have a lot of deep capacity because they're filling in all over the state where there aren't big departments. The Providence Police Department has a great reputation for community policing, has been one of the leaders in community policing, publicly reported inside and outside of Providence. So they probably had a lot of networks of information as well. It's just, how did you triage them?